Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is The Ninth Configuration by William Peter Blatty. Now, William Peter Blatty is perhaps most famous for writing the book The Exorcist, which of course was made into the film The Exorcist. Now, The Ninth Configuration is actually a reworked version of an earlier novel from Blatty called Twinkle, Twinkle, Killer Kane, which was published in 1966. But William Peter Blatty, he wanted to flesh out some of the ideas of the original novel a little bit more, and essentially he rewrote the novel as The Ninth Configuration, and this was published in 1978. So the plot of The Ninth Configuration is, it's about this experimental psychiatric hospital completely run by the military, and all the patients at the hospital were all military officers who have seemed to have gone insane, and there's no real explanation as to how these men went insane, and there are even some people who think that they might be faking it in order to avoid combat. But what happens is the Pentagon ends up sending in this psychologist who is also a war colonel named Kane, and Kane goes in there to try to figure out how these men went insane and to try to cure these men of their insanity. But throughout the book, Kane also battles his own personal demons, and it turns out that Kane does have a few dark secrets. Now, in the book, you realize that Kane is a deeply religious man who even wanted to be a priest originally, and what happens is, in the book, there's this patient named Cutshaw who is a former astronaut who pretty much had a psychotic breakdown right before he was about to go to the moon, like literally right before liftoff was about to happen, and Cutshaw is an atheist, and when he finds out that Kane is a very religious man, Cutshaw constantly gets into arguments with Kane over the existence of God, and he asks Kane to show him evidence of the existence of God, but all Kane can offer him is his own philosophical and theological views, which Cutshaw, of course, can't accept. Now, The Ninth Configuration is definitely a theological novel. It's a book that definitely explores themes such as the possible existence of God and the nature of good and evil in man. In that sense, it's a very similar book to The Exorcist, which also explored a lot of the same themes, and it's a book that definitely asks the question, does God really exist, and why do men do evil things, and why do men even do good things? Is it really the work of God and the devil, or is it just human nature? And the book does a really good job at exploring a lot of these theological themes, but never being preachy, because the book does not say flat out that God exists, you know. The book basically says there's no proof one way or the other whether God exists, you know, it's all a matter of belief. So, it's not preachy by any means, and that's something I really appreciated about the book. Now, The Ninth Configuration is actually connected to The Exorcist, because the character of Cutshaw from this book was actually a character in The Exorcist. Now, in The Exorcist, there was a scene where Chris McNeil, the main character of that book, was having a party at her house, and one of the guests at the party was an astronaut who was about to go to the moon, and then Reagan, the little girl who got possessed by a demon in that book, goes up to him and says, "You're gonna die up there." So the character of Cutshaw from this book is actually the astronaut from The Exorcist. So in a way, you can look at this book as being like a semi-sequel to The Exorcist. That being said, however, you can easily read this book without having to read The Exorcist. However, if you do read The Exorcist, it definitely adds a whole new dimension to the character character of Cutshaw in this book. And I actually found the character of Kane in this book to be a very similar character to the character of Father Karras from The Exorcist, because both characters are people who are deeply religious men, but both have to battle their own personal demons. And William Peter Blatty actually considers this to be the second book of what he likes to call the Faith Trilogy, called that because all three books deal with the concept of faith. The first book in the trilogy is of course The Exorcist, and the third book in the trilogy is the novel Legion, which is considered to be a more direct sequel to The Exorcist. Now, the Ninth Configuration, I thought, was a brilliant book, and even though the book does go into a lot of serious themes, it's actually a really funny book as well. There's actually quite a bit of humor in the book, but the book manages to be both funny and serious at the same time, and a lot of the humor in the book really comes from the patients at the hospital. Like, there's one patient who is actually writing Shakespeare for dogs, and there's another patient who thinks he's Superman, so a lot of the stuff that goes on at the hospital can be looked at as absurd, but it's handled very realistically. Like, you can believe it in context of what's going on at the hospital, but like I said, it manages to be both funny and serious at the same time, and some of the dialogue in this book is actually beautifully written, and the book in general I actually think is a pretty moving story, and I'm not gonna lie, by the time I was finished reading this, it actually kind of brought a tear to my eye. You know, it really is a very, very good book, and I highly recommend people read this. Now, the Ninth Configuration was made into a movie in 1980. Now, the movie was originally released under the title Twinkle, Twinkle, Killer Kane, which was the title of the original version of this novel, but later the movie was released under the title The Ninth Configuration. So, yeah, that's my review on The Ninth Configuration by William Peter Blatty, and bye.